communicating effectively is an essential skill, not just in everyday life, but especially in chemistry as well. And so if we think about how we learned written communication, just with the English language, the first thing we started off with was our letters. And so that would be our alphabet, our ABCs. And then once we mastered those individual characters, then we started to string them together in certain orders and sequences to form words. And so those words expressed actual objects or actions, and they had a meaning to them. It wasn't just a random jumble of letters. It was a meaningful sequence of letters that represented something. Once we had mastered those and spelling words, things like that, vocabulary, we could start to string those individual ideas and actions together to form a complete idea, and we could write sentences. And once we had mastered that structure of how a sentence goes together to form an idea, we could start to link them together to tell an entire story. And so by looking at this progression, by starting small, starting with the basic building blocks, then learning how to put those building blocks together to form words, and then take those concepts and link them together to express an idea, and then take one or more ideas to tell an even larger story. We can apply the same idea of using building blocks to communicate larger and larger ideas in the field of chemistry as well. So in chemistry, the very first thing we need to learn and gain a mastery of are our building blocks, which are the element symbols of the periodic table. Those are our ABCs in chemistry. Once we have a good mastery and recognition of those, then we can begin to link them together in a meaningful sequence to represent actual chemicals, and which are represented by a chemical formula. And those would be analogous to learning to spell words, sight words, spelling words, vocabulary, things like that. Once we have a good ability to express a chemical substance using a chemical formula, then we can begin to describe changes that occur when we mix different substances together, and we do that with a chemical equation. And a chemical equation would be analogous to learning to write sentences. Just like with sentence writing, there's a certain order, a certain structure that you use, and when we write chemical equations, there are certain conventions that we use to express what is it we're starting with, what is it we're ending with. Once we're able to describe a single change by way of a chemical equation, using formulas, using symbols, then we can begin to describe larger changes, larger systems that are occurring in the natural world. And so we begin to link these chemical equations together to tell a bigger story, much the same way that we take sentences and we string them together to relate an entire larger idea in the process of a story. And so that sequence of chemical equations that tells that story is what we refer to as a mechanism. So really, even if this is your first time looking at chemistry, and studying it in depth, the ability to communicate in chemistry, as daunting as it may seem at times, can actually be thought of as paralleling the very process that you used and we all used in grade school in learning to write and communicate in a written fashion.